If the British Army was asked to fight tonight,
Yes.
it would fight tonight. And I don't think anybody in this room should be under any illusion that if the Russians invaded Eastern Europe tonight, then we would meet them in that.
This is a serious moment that I come before the committee. Defence intelligence will reveal today that the front line is now less stable than at any time since the early days of the full-scale Russian invasion in February 22. And we've seen in recent weeks a very clear escalation from Putin and his forces. They've stepped up attacks on the energy system in Ukraine ahead of winter. They've stepped up attacks on civilian centres, killing children. They've deployed at least 10,000 North Korean troops to the battle front line. And there are unconfirmed but media reports today of Russia firing a new ballistic missile into Ukraine, which we know have been preparing for months. So that while the Ukrainian actions on the battlefield speak for themselves, Mr. Chairman, be in no doubt that the UK government is stepping up our support for Ukraine, determined to continue doubling down our support for Ukraine. And this is what I told Minister Umerov in a long call on Tuesday. It's what I discussed with the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on Sunday. And as I told you and the House yesterday, it holds up for this committee as well. I won't be drawn on the operational details of the conflict. It risks both operational security, and in the end, the only one that benefits from such a public debate is President Putin.
So-called hybrid grey zone activity, these attacks on critical national infrastructure, Russian aircraft buzzing our airspace on a regular basis, cyber attacks every day. This is happening now, and we've got to ensure that we've got the capability to fight the fight today as well as deter for war fighting. If the British Army was asked to fight tonight,
Yes.
it would fight tonight. And I don't think anybody in this room should be under any illusion that if the Russians invaded Eastern Europe tonight, then we would meet them in that fight. That would be the first point I'd make. Secondly, and as we go through the classified briefing, can we sit here and say that 3 UK division carries no operational risk whatsoever? Of course not. There are a range of operational risks and operational strengths associated with that division, and that is exactly what the Strategic Defence Review is addressing. We've spoken at this committee before about a munitions strategy and a munitions plan. We know we need more lethality. We haven't been secret about that. The Secretary of State has talked about stepping up some of those joint enablers that we need to do. So, of course, there are areas that we're addressing through the SDR. But my third point would be critical to responding is ensuring that we can respond and adapt. And the ability to respond and adapt absolutely lies at the heart of our industrial strategy. And we're seeing this playing out in Ukraine. It's the ability for Ukraine itself and those allies of Ukraine that can respond and provide whatever they need, or in our case, whatever the alliance needs in the case of a major conflagration with Russia, is able to have the industrial strength to respond. And that is why so much of what we're doing is through the SDR, and what we've done up to the SDR is about absolutely embedding a sovereign industrial base and an allied industrial base as well, because the situation changes on the ground, as you well know.
General,
Thank you.
Just one second.
Thank you, General. Yeah, no, I'm absolutely certain that if the Russians invaded Eastern Europe, the British Army would be there. I'm a reserve officer, so I would probably be there with them.
We're there now, of course, in Estonia.
We are, but in force.
And
in force.
In our Ready for War report said that our armed forces aren't ready for a high-intensity war. Has that changed? That report came out in February. Has there been any change to that situation?
Well, we discussed this, I think, at the last committee, and I think you said we will have to agree to disagree, I think is
Yes.
what your words. Because I made the point that we are ready to go to war, but I also made the point that there are operational risks associated with sustaining that war. And I think the previous Secretary of State said that, reminded ourselves, whatever the context, we'll be fighting as an alliance of 32 member states. And so looking at this in isolation of a particular country, I think masks the fact that the strength of the alliance is the 32 nations within it. But we'll go back to the point, and the Secretary of State's been on record for saying it. We've got more to do to ensure that we can endure the fight, and that's what the SDR is about.
I think just wanted to come on
You
that.
made the conversation well, General, and we did agree to disagree. So the key question which you just slightly touched on then is how resilient would our army be? In other words, how long could we keep them in the field?
Well, I mean, fighting, as a number of people in this room know, fighting power is not just about equipment and capability, it's about the moral component. And the moral component is about staying in the fight. And I'm wholly confident that every member of the British Armed Forces has the moral component to sustain the fight. In terms of capability, we've been clear that we need to we're going over old ground.
Sorry, I'm talking about resilience. So you can put an army in the field for how long for?
Well, you wouldn't expect us
And I quite understand we have equipment.
You wouldn't expect us
as
on
you
live.
guess, we've been around a bit, so we understand that bit.
You wouldn't expect us on live television to tell ourselves exactly how many munitions types we have against a certain scenario.
But the resilience is
The issue is about resilience.
The resilience is a really important question, and Ukraine reminds us of this truth, that your armed forces are only as strong as your industry that stands behind them. And that's why the General laid stress on the fact that the reforms that we're trying to lead now on a defence industrial strategy aren't just what we're embarking on now and expect to be accelerated after the strategic defence review. These are a really necessary component of being able to fight more effectively and being better prepared in the future. It's one of the reasons why we were so badly exposed when Russia did invade Ukraine. It took 287 days for the government then to get a contract in place for fresh production of NLAWs. It took more than 500 days to get a fresh contract in place for new ammunition. That was because our industry was not in a place that was resilient, as Mr. Twigg is arguing, in order to support a fight in the future.
Can we run to the industrial base? And you mentioned NLAW before, and I know for the reasons you've set out, you're not going to talk about for operational in Storm Shadow, but then to be able to send Storm Shadow one to Ukraine or elsewhere, or keep our own stockpiles, we need to produce enough of them. So could you say, just another example was the Aster missile system, which prior to 2022 took 42 months to actually get going. So what is your current assessment of stockpiles in both missiles and munitions, and what are you doing about it?
As the General touched on this earlier on, Mr. Twigg, there's a broad recognition that, in part because we've not sufficiently invested in previous years in ensuring we've got the stockpiles we need, but in part because we've rightly donated what we can and supplied Ukraine for their fight, there is a big job to be done, both to continue to supply Ukraine and to replenish our own stockpiles. A job that isn't just about government making the financial commitment or providing the leadership and the certainty, but it's about the defence industry also making the investments for the long term.